This week's Torah portion is Noah. The story of Noah is simple and at the same time full of nuance. We could write hundreds of totally different sermons about Noah. If you're lucky, you'll get to hear Emma's take tomorrow. You probably remember this story from when you were a kid, but here's a quick recap. God was going to destroy the earth because humans had become so corrupt that he wanted to start over. God asked Noah to build an ark when Noah was 500 years old. It took Noah 120 years to build, with the idea that during those 120 years, he could convince the people to change their ways. He didn't succeed. God asked Noah to collect the male and female of every animal, rain, 40 days, 40 nights, dove, olive branch, you know the rest. Do you remember how Noah's neighbors treated him? They made fun of him. You remember in a movie somewhere that all of Noah's neighbors are doubting him, they're teasing him, they're laughing at the possibility that God would wipe out the earth. They pester him, asking him, why is he wasting his time on this silly project? You might remember the Bill Cosby sketch, am I showing my age? On Noah, do you remember that? The neighbor says to Noah, what's this thing blocking my driveway? After Noah explains, the neighbor shakes his head and says, there's one in every neighborhood. Years ago, my Scott decided to build a fence around our yard. First, he put up these posts that were 12 feet tall, all around the yard. It looked like Stonehenge. The neighbors and I were quite worried. What the heck was he doing? But it ended up Scott knew exactly what he was doing. At the right time, he trimmed down those posts to the correct height and built what turned out to be a beautiful handmade fence that is still there today. Afterward, I apologized to Scott for doubting him, and I compared him to Noah, who also built something that seemed crazy at the time, and no one believed in him. The accounting of Noah's neighbors and their intolerance is not in fact in the Torah text. Our sages suggested it in the Talmud and other commentaries. Why did they bring it up, and why does it still resonate with us? It's more than just a nya, 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 you were wrong, and he was right, or that the guy who listened to God won. I think it really is an example of the need to protect and promote diversity. In this instance, Noah is expressing a point of view that is different from everyone else's. Already, we know that Noah is not like the other guys. He was righteous in his generation, surrounded by such debased people that God wanted to wipe them off the face of the earth. Noah thought differently. We have to remember that in all of our calls for diversity and inclusion, that we benefit when we include people of different backgrounds and faiths, races, ethnicities, sexual orientation, and gender orientation, but also people of different physical, mental, and intellectual abilities. Noah's neighbors bullied him because they didn't take the time to try to understand and hear his way of thinking. We still see that happen today. At our daughter's school, which smartly uses the term neurodiversity to recognize that everyone's brains work differently, regularly showcase students who came to the school to get away from such taunts. We've seen this lack of respect for people with differences go from the schoolyard all the way up to the highest rungs of our political ladders. The story of Noah provides reason to promote other diversities as well. He brings pairs of all the animals on Earth to protect biodiversity. Natural ecosystems cannot thrive without that. The rainbow at the end of the flood represents not just God's covenant with humans to never destroy the earth again. The spectrum of colors, symbolic of different types of human beings, according to the 19th century Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, shows God's love of diverse peoples as well. Rabbi Hirsch writes, God unites the colors all together in one common bond of peace. All fragments of one life all refracted rays of the one Spirit of God. Do you remember what happens to Noah after the flood is over and they leave the ark? He gets embarrassingly drunk. Some see this as a moral failure on the part of this righteous man. A more forgiving view is that he has worked tirelessly for 120 years to prepare for the flood. He spent a full 12 months caring for, my mask is failing. He spent a full 12 months caring for every animal on the ark, and he's just seen his whole world literally wash away. Today, we might say he is justified in experiencing a mental health crisis after all that. And we'd pray for a refuah shlema, just like we did a few moments ago, for his full healing of body and soul. This week's reading furthers the moral case for diversity that began in last week's Torah portion. In the creation story of Genesis, we read the famous line that God created Adam b'tselem Elohim, in God's image. This means that we are all created in God's image, and no matter our differences, we all have a spark of the divine in us. That further implies that we all have the potential to make this world a better place. And in fact, studies show that businesses that have more diverse work staff perform better. We see it in the corporate world, we see it in our classrooms, we see it in our synagogues, that all of us benefit from having as many different ideas as possible. People from diverse backgrounds bring us new ideas. They ask if the same old is really the best. They force us to confront our traditional ways of thinking, and in doing so, enable us to grow as well. Studies show that our creativity and productivity is increased as a result. There is a coda to the Noah story. While Noah brought all kinds of animals on board, you may be thinking how undiverse the humans were who were on the ark. It was just Noah, his unnamed wife, and their 3 sons. Without spending too much time dwelling on how they were going to propagate among themselves, you can imagine that their descendants were all like them. The Torah reads, everyone on earth had the same language and the same words. And what did they do? They attempted to build a monument for themselves, this attempted Tower of Babel. They became so self-involved and self-important that they forgot the values of kindness and humility. When God stops them from completing the tower, he also confounds their speech, gives them all different languages, and scatters them around the whole earth. In other words, God recognizes and promotes diversity to bring out the best in humans. On this Shabbat, let's all remember that we too can be like God. We can encourage our places of work, school, and worship to be open to all peoples. We can be understanding and patient toward people who don't look like us, don't think like us, or react to external pressures like we do. And as we get out of our own heads and learn to empathize with others, that brings us a little closer to the divine as well. Shabbat Shalom.